which we'll talk about in just a moment, and maybe Jesus. You're going to put Jesus in there somewhere. And that's fine, but there's so much more than that. I think if we go throughout the whole of the Bible, we'll see that the migration of people, and of God's people, is all over the place. But the place to begin is with the image of God. Now, Alexi's going to jump on this as well, in a different kind of way. You see, you don't begin the discussion with legality, because that's where the conversation stops. I mean, we need to get there. We need legislation. See, we need to get to that point, but we don't begin there. We begin the discussion with immigrants as people, made in the image of God. As an Old Testament person, I could kind of run rampant on that topic, but what that tells you is that everyone has worth, but also we are made in the image of God so that we might rule the earth. And what that tells you is that even the immigrant has potential to do something significant. See, they're no longer the victims. We're no longer the victims. As Hispanics, you see, we have something to contribute to the country. So not only that we're valuable and that we shouldn't be mistreated, but because we're made in the image of God, and because, you see, we can rule the earth, understood biblically, we can contribute to this country. Not just the country can put up with us. It's a very different point of view. We move from victimization to positive contribution. That's where we begin the discussion. Then, if you just read the Bible, you begin to see there's all kinds of narratives about people on the move. Even the father of the faith, Abram, you see. He moves into Canaan, chapter 12. But later on in chapter 12, he moves into Egypt. Why? Because he's hungry. And you know the story. He kind of lies about his wife. He negotiates at the border to get in, to survive, to feed his family, and all the people who live with him, because he is the head of a clan, so it's not just two people, it's a whole clan of people that he has to take care of. We can move our way through the various patriarchs. The classic case is Joseph. It's not that he wants to be where he is, but he's put there. And he finds himself in Potiphar's house. You know the story there too. And of course, he's the innocent one, but of course, when it goes before the courts, he's the foreigner, so he's the guilty one. He's put in jail. But then he comes out, you see, because he interprets dreams. Remember the story? And he ends up second to Pharaoh. But then his family comes again. Why? Because they're hungry. And the thing is that it then says, you know, that the brothers didn't recognize him. And I'm going to myself, how do you not recognize your brother? I mean, come on. My brother's 5'6". Well, I know how to look anywhere I see him. You see, in Egyptian culture, the higher up in the hierarchy, you would have been shaved. You would have painted yourself, makeup. He does this thing pretending not to understand. He uses an interpreter, but he understands everything that they're saying. You see, the immigrant never forgot his mother tongue. And when he dies, he says, "Take my bones back to my home." Something in his heart never forgot. And there's other stories we can talk about. We can talk about Ruth. Tomorrow I'm doing a seminar on the biblical piece, but we'll spend an hour on it, not just 15 minutes, volando rápidamente, kind of flowing through this quickly. Look at Ruth. She's the immigrant. She had married an immigrant because, if you remember the story, Naomi and her family had gone to Moab to marry Moabite women. So she marries the immigrant who dies. Now she becomes the immigrant and she goes back to Judah to live in Bethlehem. And she has to negotiate life in Bethlehem. And if you look at that story in chapter 1, when she arrives with Naomi, and the women of the town greet them, they don't even mention Ruth. You see, she's a non-person. But by the end of the story in chapter 4, they say, "This woman is worth more to you than 7 sons." And you see the trajectory of an immigrant woman moving into the community and all the things she has to do as her mother-in-law gives her the clues on how to navigate this new place. As you read it, you begin to see they keep talking to her and referring to her as Ruth the Moabite. She's a labeled person. At the end of the book, of course, is the genealogy of David. And what Ruth never knew is that she was in the line of a story that was so big that would change the world. The immigrant story matters even if they don't even know where it's going, under the sovereignty of God. This is my first CCDA. Is this the same place? No, okay, all right. Let me give you one more narrative. And tomorrow we spend more time on this. Another great one, and I always use this one because it's fun, is Daniel. You see, what happens with Daniel is, they say, look, we're going to change you. And I'm going to step on the cord. We're going to change you. And they changed their names. And they trained them in the ways of the empire to serve the empire. This is the best and the brightest and the best looking, if you read the narrative, of the exiles. And in fact, they do a better job than anybody else, these immigrant boys, young men. What they say is, we want to keep our food. Good night, if you have any kind of bicultural or different cultural background, that makes perfect sense. Because what do you want to keep? Your food. If you go into Denver, you go to Federal Boulevard, you know when you're in the Hispanic section because you see pupuserias and taquerias. You know when you're in the Vietnamese section because then you see those funny letters on the signs that you can't figure out. I'm married to a pura gringa, to an American from the suburbs. We fell in love and all this kind of stuff, But then you get Christmas. What do you eat for Christmas? When do you eat for Christmas? What do you eat? Nochebuena. Christmas Eve. Black beans, tacos, tamales, pero tamales guatemaltecos. They're better than Mexican ones, actually. Repent, my brother, repent. So we had to negotiate how we do Christmas. So Christmas Eve, it's tacos and the black beans and the rice and the tamales that we bring from Guatemala, a little limon, Christmas Day, it's like the turkey and the ham. It's great to be in a bicultural America. You gain weight, but it's a happy place to be. What do you do for birthdays? Piñatas. But you see them holding on to their identity. Even as they do wonderful things for the Lord. I'll give you more examples. Esther and Nehemiah go through all those. Biblical legislation. This is where we'll spend, if you come to the workshop tomorrow, we'll spend an hour on this because we need to get the legislation. See? And the thing is, if you go to the Old Testament, this is what happens sometimes when people talk about Leviticus and Deuteronomy, and I appreciate that, you see. But what they do is they go to the moral principle about loving, the stranger. Good. But the next step is to ask, what does the law actually offer in terms of legislation for the stranger? That's another discussion. See, one thing is the law, takes care of the stranger. Yes, it does. But then the question is how? What do they actually give the stranger, and what do they expect of the stranger? That's the kind of discussion we need to get to in this country. Why offer them legislation? What kind of legislation? And what are the expectations? That's what we'll talk about tomorrow in the workshop. What you see, just to give you an idea. You see, in ancient Israel, strangers had two main problems. You're looking at a peasant agrarian society based on land. If you don't own land, you can't live. So they end up being day laborers. They can't inherit land in the Israelite system. The second thing is, in the Old Testament and the ancient world, you didn't have a welfare state. So what you had was extended families that would take care of you if you got sick or anything went wrong. What's the problem with the stranger? There's no extended family. And now you begin to see why legislation happens. And then you begin to move into the Old Testament law to see what kind of legislation it offers the stranger. And then we need to ask ourselves, can this law of the Bible speak to the law for this country?